At 3:17 in the morning, the hospital felt like a place suspended outside of time. The corridors were empty, washed in the faint hum of flickering fluorescent lights, the kind that cast a pale, uneasy glow over everything they touched. Dr. Aaron Blake moved through the stillness with the numb familiarity of someone who had spent too many nights awake inside these walls, unaware that this would be the night that would mark him forever. He would later describe the air as strange, almost heavy, as if the hospital itself sensed what was about to unfold long before any human did. The moment the mortuary technician stepped into the cold room, he expected nothing more remarkable than routine. It was always a quiet place, insulated from the chaos of the ER, a space where the world's noise seemed to fall away. He walked across the tiled floor, his breath turning faintly visible in the chilled air, and reached for the clipboard to verify the newly arrived patient. But before he could finish reading the name, a sound fractured the silence, a single dull thud coming from one of the body bags. He froze, the clipboard slipping from his fingers, clattering impossibly loud against the metal table beside him. For a moment, he wondered if his mind was betraying him, if exhaustion had twisted an ordinary sound into something monstrous. But then it came again, softer this time, but undeniably real. With trembling hands, he approached the bag, each step feeling heavier than the last. He unzipped it halfway, expecting God only knew what. And then he saw her. Emily Carter, 38 years old, declared dead just hours earlier after a brutal fight inside the emergency room. Her eyes were open. Her chest rose in a desperate, shuddering gasp for air. The technician stumbled backward, hitting the wall as shock ripped through him like ice. Down the hall, the charged nurse heard the technician's frantic shout and sprinted toward the cold room, her shoes striking the linoleum in sharp, panicked bursts. She would later say that the sound of his voice alone told her something was terribly wrong, something beyond the ordinary tragedies they carried every day. When she entered and saw Emily struggling to breathe, suspended between death and life in that half-unzipped bag, she felt the world tilt. She grabbed the nearest phone and called the ER with a message that made no medical sense, yet demanded immediate response. Within moments, the hospital erupted into motion as if jolted awake. Dr. Aaron Blake was reviewing charts when the call reached him, and at first he thought it had to be a mistake. Dead patients did not breathe. Dead patients did not move. Yet the urgency in the nurse's voice carved through his skepticism, and he rushed toward the mortuary wing with a force fueled by instinct rather than logic. When he arrived and saw Emily alive, barely, but undeniably alive, every assumption he had relied on throughout his career seemed to fracture. He stood frozen for a heartbeat too long, unable to reconcile the woman before him with the finality of the death he had pronounced. Something impossible was unfolding right there in front of him. As the team rushed to wheel Emily out of the cold room and back toward the ER, the hallway flooded with the kind of energy reserved for trauma alerts. Nurses pulled equipment behind them. A respiratory therapist shouted for warm blankets, and a staff member kept repeating, "How is this happening?" under their breath, as if the words might anchor reality back into place. Dr. Aaron Blake was walking beside the gurney, his mind racing faster than his feet. Nothing in his training prepared him for this moment, this collision of terror, relief, and disbelief. And as he looked at Emily's face, pale yet undeniably alive, he knew this night would always follow him for the rest of his life. 3 hours before the cold room erupted into chaos, Emily Carter walked into the emergency department, clutching her chest, her breathing shallow and strained. She arrived just past midnight, guided by her husband, who kept whispering, "Stay with me, Em," as though he could feel something slipping away even before the doctors did. To the triage nurse, Emily looked like countless patients who came in with chest pain, scared, exhausted, hopeful that this was just a warning sign and not the real thing. But there was something in her eyes, a quiet mixture of confusion and fear that suggested she already sensed her body was fighting a battle she couldn't see. As she was guided into an exam room, the story of her life began to reveal itself in fragments. A graphic designer who rarely took breaks, she carried the weight of deadlines and motherhood with a smile that always seemed slightly tired. Flashbacks surfaced like delicate, flickering images, kneeling beside her daughter as they iced cupcakes for a birthday party, sketching character designs on her tablet late into the night, laughing at the kitchen table while her son showed her a picture he'd drawn of their family. These moments glow with warmth, untouched by the storm now unfolding inside her. Dr. Aaron Blake entered the room with the calm steadiness Emily needed. He listened as she struggled to describe her symptoms, sharp pain radiating through her chest, a heaviness in her legs, and a growing sense that something is. Compressions began. Medications were pushed. The air filled with the unspoken plea every clinician feels during resuscitation. Come back. Don't let this be the end. Minutes stretched, blurred, and grew heavy. Resuscitation went far longer than usual, fueled by Emily's age, her family waiting outside, the sense that she still had more life to live. But at 12:41 a.m., after every possible effort, Dr. Blake made the call. The room went still. Gloves were removed, machines silenced. Emily Carter was gone. Her husband's cry from the hallway was muffled but devastating. Staff members exchanged solemn nods, small gestures of solidarity in the face of another loss they would quietly carry. Emily's body was prepared with tenderness and respect before being transferred to the hospital mortuary, a transition that always felt too final, even for seasoned professionals. But beneath his practiced composure, something unsettled Dr. Blake. A faint, persistent tug of doubt he couldn't explain. He shook it off, telling himself exhaustion was playing tricks on him. But later, when Emily's eyes would open in the cold room, that doubt would come roaring back, no longer ignorable, no longer abstract. Something about that night had been different all along. When the mortuary technician first screamed, the hospital's night shift instinctively froze. It wasn't a sound anyone expected to hear from that wing of the building. A place defined by silence, by endings, by the final stillness that followed the chaos of the ER. The technician's voice carried a mixture of terror and disbelief, a sound that pulled people from their tasks long before they understood why. The charge nurse was the first to reach him, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the half-unzipped body bag and the woman inside it struggling for air. For a heartbeat, her brain rejected what her eyes were telling her. It had to be hypothermic muscle twitching, some reflexive movement. But then Emily's lips parted, and a soft, broken gasp cut through the cold room. There was no denying it. She was alive. The nurse bolted into the hallway, shouting for help. Her voice echoed through the corridor, sharp and urgent. Staff rushed toward the mortuary, some thinking a worker might be injured, others expecting a structural emergency. No one anticipated the truth, not until they saw Emily's chest rising and falling, faint and uneven, but unmistakably real. It was, as one nurse later put it, the kind of moment that makes you question the rules of the world. Dr. Blake arrived seconds later, breathless, heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt since his residency. When he stepped into the room and saw Emily, saw the color beginning to warm her face, saw her fingers twitching weakly, his mind fractured under the weight of impossibility. He had pronounced her dead. He had done everything by the book. And yet, here she was, fighting for air like someone crawling back toward the surface of a deep, dark ocean. Voices overlapped with frantic instructions as the team transferred Emily onto a gurney. The cold from the room radiated off her skin as nurses wrapped her in warm blankets, their hands moving with equal parts precision and trembling disbelief. The technician stood back against the wall, still pale, whispering, "She knocked. I heard her knock," as though saying it out loud might make it more real. As they raced back toward the ER, the documentary narration cuts in to explain what doctors would soon debate: Lazarus syndrome. A rare, poorly understood phenomenon in which spontaneous return of circulation happens minutes after failed resuscitation. Minutes, not hours. The narrator clarifies that fewer than 40 cases have ever been documented worldwide. Theories range from delayed effects of CPR to trapped air in the chest suddenly releasing pressure, but none of them account for what happened to Emily. She hadn't come back after a brief pause. She had shown no signs of cardiac activity for over 2 hours, long after any known mechanism could still be at play. Back in the ER, staff moved quickly, almost fearfully, unsure whether they were witnessing a medical miracle or something far more complicated. They placed her on monitors, warmed her slowly, restarted medications, evaluated her neurological responses, and to their astonishment, her heart regained a stronger rhythm. Her breathing deepened. She stabilized. Not fully, but enough to silence the panic and replace it with a heavy, awe-filled tension. As the room settled into a cautious rhythm, a nurse whispered, "It's like she refused to stay gone." No one responded. They were all too busy watching her chest rise and fall, trying to make sense of the surreal scene unfolding in front of them. For the first time, Dr. Blake felt fear. Not for losing her, but for what her return might mean. The boundaries he relied on for years suddenly felt porous, fragile. And as he looked down at Emily, he realized he wasn't just treating a patient anymore. He was confronting a mystery. A mystery that had only just begun. When Emily finally opened her eyes the next morning, the room was bathed in soft, golden sunlight, the kind that makes hospital walls look almost gentle. Nurses had been checking on her every few minutes, unsure what to expect after the night they'd just lived through. But when she blinked awake, slow, disoriented, but undeniably present, every conversation in the room stilled. She looked around with the expression of someone who had traveled far beyond any road and was still finding her way back. Dr. Blake arrived at her bedside cautiously, his heart locked in a strange balance of relief and apprehension. He had dozens of clinical questions prepared.
Nurses moving with urgency, the rapid rise and fall of Dr. Blake's shoulders as he worked on her. She even recounted small details, the pen that slipped from a technician's pocket, the way a monitor briefly flickered before flatlining, the tremor in a nurse's hand as she pushed another dose of medication. And then she said something that made Dr. Blake's breath catch. She remembered hearing someone say, "Please come back." She looked directly at him as she repeated it. He stood there stunned, because although he had thought those words in a moment of helpless grief, he had never spoken them aloud. He had told no one, yet somehow she knew. Emily continued describing what she called the quiet, a warm, dark expanse where she felt suspended, held, and oddly unafraid. She said it was peaceful, but not empty. There was a presence with her, familiar and loving. She felt it before she recognized it, the way one remembers a scent from childhood. It was her grandmother, gone for years, yet unmistakably there. She didn't speak, she whispered, but I knew she wanted me to rest. For the first time since waking, tears slipped down her cheeks. I didn't want to leave, but something pushed me back, something that felt like unfinished business. The documentary voiceover gently bridges her experience with scientific perspective. It explains that near-death experiences, often featuring out-of-body sensations, tunnels, lights, or encounters with loved ones, have been reported for decades. Neuroscientists propose theories: retinal shutdown, surges of brain activity, hallucinations triggered by oxygen deprivation. Yet patients across cultures describe strikingly similar scenes, leaving the truth suspended between science and something less defined. But Emily's recounting is different. Not dramatic, not embellished. It's quiet, reverent, almost mournful. Whether viewers interpret her story through a spiritual lens or a neurological one, the result is the same. What happened to Emily wasn't just a biological anomaly. It was an experience that seemed to change her right down to the core. And no one, not even Dr. Blake, knew then that this transformation would be heartbreakingly short-lived. In the days following her miraculous return, Emily Carter's condition seemed fragile, balanced on the edge of something the doctors couldn't define. Her vitals fluctuated unpredictably, sometimes steady, sometimes dangerously unstable. Dr. Blake found himself drawn back to her room repeatedly, checking monitors, adjusting medications, and offering reassurance that sometimes felt more for himself than for her. He couldn't shake the weight of responsibility pressing on him, nor the quiet guilt for the moment he had pronounced her dead. Each visit was a mixture of hope and tension, a silent prayer that the miracle of the previous night could hold. Despite the extraordinary circumstances, the medical team pressed on with careful investigation. Tests revealed a rare clotting disorder, a hidden threat that had silently jeopardized her life for years. Suddenly, the pieces of her first collapse made grim sense, but the prognosis remained unstable. Her body was a battlefield still recovering from the near impossible, and every intervention felt like a delicate negotiation between life and death. The hospital staff, already shaken by the surreal events of the cold room, moved with heightened vigilance, their every step measured against the memory of the previous night. Then on the third night, the quiet tension shattered. Monitors screamed alarms as Emily went into sudden cardiac arrest. The team sprang into motion with the trained precision born of years in emergency medicine. But this time, their movements were sharpened by the haunting knowledge of what had happened before. Compressions began immediately, medications were administered, and the room hummed with the desperate energy of a fight no one wanted to lose. Each passing second felt like an eternity, punctuated by the thrum of machines and the collective hold of anxious breaths. 26 minutes later, Dr. Blake finally realized that the struggle had reached its end. Emily passed away for the second time, and this time there was no miraculous return. Silence fell, heavy and unbroken, enveloping the room like a shroud. Nurses lowered their heads, some with tears tracing quiet paths down their cheeks. The technician who had witnessed her first awakening trembled, struggling to process the impossible, followed by the finality he now faced. Dr. Blake stood motionless, the weight of both experiences pressing against him, leaving an ache that would linger far beyond the hospital walls. In the aftermath, staff members described a grief unlike they had known. Losing her once was agonizing. Losing her twice left an indelible mark. Each clinician carried their own fragment of shock, disbelief, and sorrow. Dr. Blake admitted years later that he never fully recovered from the dual experience, an overwhelming combination of awe, hope, and ultimate despair. Even for a physician trained to measure and control life, Emily's story.
Experts in cardiology and neurology weighed in, offering explanations grounded in physiology. Some suggested that delayed residual effects of medications administered during CPR, coupled with subtle electrical activity undetectable by standard monitoring, could account for brief resuscitations. Others pointed to rare forms of reperfusion, where blood flow returned spontaneously after prolonged arrest. Yet even these mechanisms were insufficient to explain Emily's 2-hour window without measurable brain or heart activity. Every explanation was partial, leaving an unmistakable void where certainty should have been. The narrative shifts to near-death experiences, or NDEs, and the mystery of consciousness. Scientists propose that oxygen deprivation could trigger vivid hallucinations, that retinal shutdown or cortical surges could produce the sensation of floating or seeing lights. But across decades and continents, accounts from patients who nearly died show uncanny consistency. Floating above one's body, witnessing events in detail, Encounters with familiar presences. Emily's recollection mirrored these reports in both subtlety and specificity. While neuroscience offered plausible interpretations, it could not fully reconcile the reality of her experience with the mechanisms of the brain as currently understood. Dr. Blake reflects on the personal impact of this knowledge gap. Medicine had taught him everything about the mechanics of life, the rhythm of the heart, the pathways of circulation, the delicate dance of cells and organs, but not enough about consciousness itself. The boundary between what is known and what is experienced had become starkly visible, leaving him with the persistent question, how much of life is measurable and how much escapes the reach of science? Throughout the hospital, the team wrestled with similar tension. Some leaned heavily on the scientific framework, clinging to explanations that would preserve a sense of control and predictability. Others, particularly those who had witnessed Emily's first awakening, carried an unspoken acknowledgement that reality sometimes exceeded comprehension. The interplay between hard data and lived experience became the undercurrent of every conversation, every reflection. In this section, the documentary emphasizes humility in medicine. Science offers structure and life-saving tools, but Emily's story exposes its limits. The case does not debunk scientific reasoning, it illuminates the mysteries still lurking within the human body and mind. The emotional tone is thoughtful and haunting, preparing viewers for the closing section, where the focus returns to the fragile, emotional truths that remain when medicine and the inexplicable collide.
Years have passed since that night in the cold room, but for Dr. Aaron Blake, Emily Carter's story has never left him. Even now, during quiet late-night shifts when the hospital corridors lie empty and the fluorescent lights hum a slow, steady rhythm, he feels her presence in the edges of memory. He remembers the moment her eyes opened, the tremor in her hands, the breath she struggled to draw after hours of being clinically gone. He remembers the whispered sentence she heard, words he had never spoken, and the overwhelming, impossible wonder that flooded the room when he realized she was alive. And most of all, he remembers losing her again, a second time, in a way that left an ache beyond comprehension. The story widens, capturing Emily's family, who lived through a different kind of haunting. Her mother speaks softly of her daughter's creativity, recounting small details that illuminate a life full of warmth. The careful sketching of imaginary worlds on her tablet, the laughter that echoed through their home, the gentle guidance she offered to her children, even when exhausted. Her children remember her voice, her patience, her quiet humor, moments that seem ordinary yet are charged with profound meaning in the shadow of her absence. Her husband describes the surreal sequence of events, the disbelief, the hope, the heartbreak, and the struggle to reconcile the miraculous with the finality of death. Dr. Blake reflects on what Emily's life and her brief return from death revealed to him about the fragile threshold between life and death. Rare cases like hers linger in the minds of healthcare professionals not only because of trauma or shock, but because they challenge the foundational assumptions of medicine. These are the cases that remind doctors that life cannot always be predicted, controlled, or fully understood. They are humbling, unsettling, and transformative. In Emily's case, they left a mark on every person who witnessed her journey, a constant, quiet awareness that the boundary between existence and oblivion is thinner than anyone realizes. As the narrative draws to a close, the documentary returns to the emotional core, the human experience of mystery, love, and memory. Dr. Blake sits in the empty hospital hallway, the dim light casting long shadows across the floor. He speaks softly, almost to himself, reflecting on the lessons he carries. We think we know where life ends, but Emily taught me we're only guessing. These words linger, heavy with reverence, capturing the uncertainty and humility that now define his understanding of medicine and life. The final moments focus on the subtle, everyday traces of Emily's life, her sketches,
Her photographs, the laughter of her children, fragments that remain like gentle reminders that life is never truly contained by what we see or measure. The camera lingers on these details, allowing viewers to sit with the quiet resonance of a life that was both extraordinary and painfully brief. As the screen fades to black, the narrator leaves one last haunting thought. Some mysteries remain not because they cannot be solved, but because they're meant to change us. Emily's story, suspended between science and the inexplicable, between life and death, continues to echo, reminding us of the fragility of life, the limits of knowledge, and the enduring power of human memory and love.